Hey there, it's Kyle Brotherson, this is Dirt Bike Channel, and I'm gonna review this 2021 Kawasaki KX250X. I've owned this bike for a little over 6 months. I bought it last November, and I've had the opportunity to ride this bike in a wide variety of conditions, everything from sand and slick rock, and muddy conditions and snow conditions, mountain conditions, desert conditions. I've taken this in a lot of different places. And I've owned it for a long time, and you get to learn a lot of things about a bike when you've owned it that long. And that's why I like to do my reviews. I have not watched a single minute of anyone else's opinions on this bike online. I just haven't. All of these thoughts are my own. I have compiled them over months, and I'm gonna tell you what I think about it, and this is how I do things. Consequently, this bike is also a sweepstakes bike, which in very, very short order will be given away to somebody out there watching it. If you haven't entered, go to dirtbikechannel.com and get entered to win this motorcycle. It ends June 30th. So if you're watching this review after June 30th of 2021, forget I said that because that's already over. But I also want to say that I really, really enjoyed having this bike. I put it earlier in this year, I put it in my top 10 of like updated motorcycles of anything that I've had. I would also say that I liked this 254 stroke better than any orange 254 stroke that I have personally ever owned. I haven't owned an orange 254 stroke since the 2016 model, and I put some time on a 2018 orange bike, but not enough to know if I liked it better than this one. I have had some recent experience on a Yamaha YZ250FX and some recent experience on the Sherco 300 SEF factory. Those bikes I would compare this to, you know, quite a bit. And this bike has some virtues on top of those other bikes, whereas it has some downfalls on those other bikes as well. I'm gonna say the things that are great, I'm gonna say the things that are good, I'm gonna say the things that need improvement, and I'm gonna say the things that sucked, and I maybe even will throw in some additional stuff in there. Yes, I'm doing this all in one take. Hey Kyle, your videos are too long. Give me the straight talk on this bike. Did you like it? Did you not? Yes, I really, really liked it. Again, I put it in my top 10 of motorcycles. It has a few downfalls, but overall, they did a lot of things right. They got this bike very light. We'll get into that later. It's very light. It's got electric start. It's got a hydraulic clutch. It's got some places on the bike that you can configure it and adjust it to your liking. And it's a really, really good bike. And I think if you're looking for a 254 stroke, you would be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't look hard at this bike. I really liked it. Now let's get into the full review of the good, the great, the good, the needs improvement, and the things that they whiffed on and really screwed it up. Just so we're clear, I paid full price for this motorcycle out of my business checking account. This is in no way connected to any dealer or Kawasaki or anyone. That's how I do my reviews. I pay full price for the bikes and I say what I think about them. Okay, so let's talk about the things that are great. I'm gonna start off with the motor, and I do this on a lot of different bikes, and I don't even apologize for it. The motor on this thing is super snappy, and it's my favorite thing about this bike. I can't tell you how many times I was on this bike when I was like, why would you want the 450 version of this? Now, I haven't ridden the 450 version of it, and it has its place for some things. But for me, this thing has so much power, I'm just like, it is amazing. And it's a very snappy power. See, the Sherco 300 that I had last year, it was a more mellow, toned down power, and that was good. But this one is lively and just like, boom, pop through things and pop you off jumps. And you can tell this is a really race-bred motorcycle, and I really, really enjoyed the motor. Something else that is great on this bike is the suspension. So on the 250 model, they went with the KYB front fork. I believe they went with the Showa fork on the 450 version of this bike. But this KYB actually had a really good balance of go fast and a little bit of go slow. In fact, I think it had better go slow valving than, in fact, I know it has better go slow valving than the YZ250FX that I had a year ago. It was more in line with the Sherco KYB valving. So it's funny because you can have all these different bikes with the same front fork, but they're valved completely differently. And then the frame, you know, differences in the frames and stuff, they can actually have a really different feel. But I really liked the front fork on this. It was a good mix of being able to go fast desert bike, but also be able to handle some of the choppier stuff in the slow stuff. So kudos to what they did on the front fork with that valving. Just so that we're clear, I actually went all the way out on the compression clickers on the front. I'm about 1 click away from the stock rebound, like the standard rebound. And then on the rear, I took 3 clicks of compression of the low speed compression out of the shock on the rear. And that was a pretty good spot for me. I'm 164 pounds, but then I have like I don't even know, 30 pounds of gear. I'm not sure how much I weigh. But anyway, I was able to find a really happy spot on this without changing any of the springs with all of my riding gear on. Something else great about this bike, and I know this is just like an ethereal concept, but it actually just gives me a lot of confidence. I feel like a hero sometimes when I'm on this bike, and I can't say that about every bike. This one gave me the feelings that I felt while I was on the YZ250X, where I just felt like I had great abilities to corner. No, I'm not a great cornering guy, but it just made me feel like I'm a better rider than I really am when I was doing drops and jumps and corners and stuff. So I really, really liked it. Super, super stable that way. And then the last thing I would say about how, the great thing I would say is I just think the bike looks stellar. I loved seeing this bike in the back of my truck. I would do a double take half the time when I saw this thing in the back of my truck. I think the styling is really, really good. I need to use a magic eraser here on the bike to get that to freshen up. I can do that later before it's given away, but I just think the bike is really, really sharp looking. So now let's talk about the things that are good. I'm gonna say the price is good. It's about $8,500 MSRP, which is basically the exact same price as the Yamaha YZ250X, so I think it's priced right. It's about $1,200 or $1,300 cheaper than an orange bike, although you do get some things on the orange bikes that you don't necessarily get on this, but we're not gonna go into the apples and apples. I think that the $8,500 is a great kind of price point for a lot of people, so that's a good thing. Something else I think is very good is the chassis has a very narrow feel to it. I really, really like how narrow it feels when you're on the bike. It's super narrow up here at the top, and it just feels narrow down by the foot pegs, and it felt kind of like you're just riding a knife, which was really cool. Something else I really enjoyed was the fact that Kawasaki lets you move the foot pegs. You can't really see it, but you can move this up and down. I actually moved them down. They go forward just slightly, but I moved the foot pegs down on this bike just to kind of open up the rider cockpit a little bit more. Obviously you can do that up on your handlebars on a lot of bikes, but the fact that they're allowing you to kind of customize the rider cockpit here by dropping your foot pegs down, I think that's great, and I think more manufacturers should be doing that. Another thing that was good is the Nissan brakes. Now, I'm showing you the rear brake here because one of the things I noticed is that I have a little bit harder time getting the feel down on a brake like this on the Nissan brakes. When I was using my foot brakes, sometimes I had a little bit of a hard time to actually just feather the brake and not keep the rear wheel from skidding. But overall, the Nissan brakes were good and they worked pretty well. I just prefer the Brembo brakes mainly for the feel, but not a reason not to get this bike. Another good thing here was the hydraulic clutch by Nissan. This clutch actually performed really, really well. It's the first time that Kawasaki has put a hydro clutch on one of their bikes, at least their 250, so welcome to this century. And I prefer the hydraulic clutches over the cable clutches, and so I really liked this guy. So don't kill me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the first time that they put electric start. Of course it doesn't start when I go, but it's the first time they put electric start on this bike. There we go, it started on the second time. Hey, the engine's super cold, but I'm really glad that we've got an electric start on this 250. It starts pretty reasonably. Once it gets hot, sometimes, you know, it's a little slower starting. There's kind of a sweet spot on this, but it started for me basically every time. Something to know is it doesn't bump start unless you start the electronics. So if the bike has been off for a few minutes and then you try to roll it down a hill, it will not bump start until you just at least hit the starter once to wake up the electronics, and then the thing will bump start. So just something to note. Something else I really like about the bike is it's pretty light. It was 240.5 pounds when it was full of fuel on my scale. Now it doesn't have a ton of fuel, so we don't want to go too far into that, but it was about 4.5 pounds lighter than the YZ250FX. Some of that is in fuel, but they actually put electric start on the bike and it's pretty light. And so they're doing some things right in that form, but we'll talk about the fuel a little bit later. I don't have a really great way to show this to you other than this kind of angle, but you can see how the radiators are kind of like canted forward, or they have a little bit of a angle to them, angle forward, to kind of make the whole front of the bike feel like it's more narrow. I like that. They've done a few things here to kind of make the bike feel narrow on the top and on the sides, and then also here up in the front, those angled radiators kind of make the whole bike feel a little bit narrow. That's pretty cool. Oh, I forgot to mention about the motor that I feel like it doesn't stall quite as easily as some of the other high-strung 254 strokes. This one seemed to kind of just tractor through things a little bit better. Although maybe that's just because I'm getting more careful about how I approach things. And giving a little bit more clutch modulation and feathering the clutch a little bit better when I'm riding these 254 strokes, but I do think this thing has a little bit less of a stalling characteristic than some of the other 254 strokes that I have personally ridden. Before I get too deep into this review, I should just mention, if you want to support Dirt Bike Channel and keep these reviews unbiased, please go to my website, dirtbikechannel.com, and use my links for companies like Rocky Mountain ATV, Amazon Motorsport. It really, really helps me out, and it doesn't cost you anything. You can click on the links for Rocky Mountain ATV down in the video description when you're getting but when you're getting tires or parts or skid plates or whatever else for your bike, getting gear, and those funds, a little bit of referral bonus is sent to me, and that helps to fund these dirt bike reviews and everything else we're doing here on Dirt Bike Channel. And now we move to some of the areas that I think this thing needs improvement. The first thing that I'll say is this does need a 6-speed gearbox. It actually has the standard KX250 5-speed close ratio motocross gearing, and although sometimes it works pretty well, there were several times that I was riding this bike in the desert and in the mountains when I was like, these gears are too close together and there's not enough of them. I'm running out of gears on this thing. I need one more gear to be able to stretch this thing out, because we're doing off-road with this thing. And you're doing a lot of stuff sometimes when you've got a mile or two of transition roads in between trails, and even sometimes when you weren't doing that, you were just like out in an area where, you know, you had some higher speed stuff. I would find myself in 5th gear quite often with this bike, trying to click up to another one. It needs a 6-speed gearbox. It even prompted me to wonder if my son's 85cc has a higher top speed than this. It didn't, because this thing revved to the moon. But when that 85 gets a bigger wheel on it, if you put the same size wheels on the bikes, that 85 might actually be faster than this top speed. It needs a 6-speed gearbox. Something else that needs improvement is I had a hard time finding like protective parts for this bike. Now I know this isn't the manufacturer's fault, but it just seemed like it was harder for me to find skid plates or aftermarket, other things that I'll get into. And so that's a concern for this bike. It just seemed like it was harder to find stuff. Now I think some of that stuff is going to come online. It already has started to come online, but it's a brand new model for 2021. And I ended up finding some things for this bike that I could get to fit, and I just said it was a 2020 KX450 and a KX450X, and it actually worked. So just know that some of the parts were a little bit harder to find on this bike. So let's talk about the silencer for a second. And man, that's a stretch to even call it a silencer. This thing is so freaking loud. It's funny because I have two different helmets, and sometimes I'd go with my helmet that's a little bit tighter, and sometimes I'd go with the helmet that is not quite as tight on my ears when I would go with my boys. And when I would wear the helmet that wasn't quite as tight, I'm like, dang, this thing is loud. I had to remix all the videos that I had on this. I kind of have like a certain audio level that I know that I go with on a lot of the other bikes. But when I'm riding this bike, I have to use a different audio leveling thing in post-production because the thing is so stinking loud. I would want to replace this with an aftermarket silencer, first off, that was spark arrested. Don't tell anyone. And something that's a little bit quieter, because that thing is stinking loud. Another thing I think needs improvement. See these little DFI modules? There's a yellow one, a white one, and a black one, and they just differentiate them by different colors of tape. Let me tell you what the manual says they do. You put in, for soft track conditions, you put in the white connector. For standard track conditions, you put in the green connector. And for hard track conditions, you put in the black. Now, I thought I knew which one of these things, I thought I knew what they did, and I thought I knew which one I liked best. And then I went out a different time and I tried them again, and I'm like, wait, I'm confused on which one I like, and I can't even exactly tell now what it's doing. So I started to ask some other riders. I asked several other riders what they thought these things did, and I was getting different answers, and people were confused. I'm confused about what this is. What constitutes a hard track condition, a standard track condition, or a soft track condition when we're riding off-road? Could you just tell us what this does to the power characteristics of the motorcycle? And I know that you have like a Kawasaki power tuner, but it's like $600 or $700. I think this needs to be changed and updated. Yamaha allows you to change your power characteristics and mapping on your phone with an app that I think is great. And so that needs to be improved, and that's where Kawasaki needs to go, is the same direction that Yamaha went. And by all means, all the manufacturers need to do that, because this is a little bit quirky and dorky, and I didn't like it, and it was pretty confusing to me and other riders. Something else that needs improvement is the engine guard. I wouldn't even call it a skid plate that came with this bike. It's like an engine guard. It was an absolute piece of trash. I threw it away because it was so bad. And then I found this, the only thing I could find was this Acerbis skid plate that has a little bit of a linkage guard down here. It's not great. I don't think it's gonna last for somebody long term if they wanna go desert race this bike or something. So that was a little bit harder, but the engine guard sucked. Like if you're gonna put an engine guard on or a skid plate on, just actually do it right. Another thing I think needs improvement is this kickstand. It's got a nice wide foot on it, but it sticks out like an outrigger. It's got this super ugly spring on it and it sticks out super far like you're gonna like drag. It reminds me of those hooks that they have on like the end of like the back of a fighter jet where they hook and they grab the cable when they're landing on a deck of an aircraft carrier. That's I think what this actually is. That needs to be, if I was gonna keep this bike long term, I'd probably change this out for a Fastway kickstand, just with that. So, oh, the other thing is, because it kind of tips over a long ways when it's on the kickstand, so, and that can make it so it'll fall over. I don't love the kickstand. While we're on the subject of the things that need to be improved, the fuel tank. This is only 1.64 gallons. The other bikes in this class are 2.2 gallons or 2.2 gallons and 2.5 gallons. The Yamaha has a 2.2 gallon tank and it's like under the seat somehow. Like the KTMs have a 2.25. I think the Honda 250RX also has like a 2.2 gallon tank. So this is the smallest fuel tank in its class and it's just not big enough for serious trail riding, I think, or even some of those longer desert loops. I don't think that is a big enough fuel tank and they should fix that. Let me show you something I've noticed that needs to be improved. See, these are the two seat bolts here, and if you're playing with your seat and taking it on and off, it's very easy to actually lose that nut out here and see how that dropped out? It just dropped out and it fell on my tire here. This can happen out in the wild and out on the trail, and you can lose these things and it's just a pain in the butt. Why not have these things captured inside of here so that that nut can't fall out? Because again, you lose this. This isn't just like something that you find in your average bolt kit. This needs to be improved because that's pretty stupid. So the airbox sucks. It's gonna take an 8mm socket here. It's gonna take a 10mm socket up here. And through the magic of film editing, I'm gonna take this off for you. Now I went on one ride with this bike and I wanted to show you how hard this is to change. So this air filter box, there's not enough room in here. Not only do we have two different bolts, but now I've got another wing screw in here, a wing nut screw. I'm gonna have to take this out and there's just not enough room in here to actually do this. But watch this. So I'm gonna try to get this out so it'll probably damaging this. Now notice how hard this is. It's because you don't have enough room to even get your hand in there to pull this screw out. Now here's your bolt out, and now we're gonna wiggle this out, and it is freaking tight. By the time I pull it here, it's jammed up on the bottom, and so I kind of wiggle this thing out, and it's like, you have to use way more pressure than you should. You're pulling this plastic off, you're pulling that off, and I almost tore this filter right here. I was as careful as I could possibly be, and yet there is not enough room inside of this airbox to reliably get this filter out without tearing it. And putting it back in, similar deal. Look, it's closed off so far down here. It doesn't even, like this part of the filter isn't even doing anything. This airbox is way too tight, and you can easily knock dirt down in here when this thing is clear full of dirt.
It is the worst design I've seen on a modern dirt bike. Airbox isn't big enough, it's too easy to tear, even when you're putting this back in, which I'll do in just a second.
It's easy to kind of tear the filter off this filter cage here, and now you're gonna suck dirt in the motor, and boom, bye-bye motor.
This whole area right here sucks and needs to be redesigned.
Okay, now we're gonna put our filter back in. Now I've looked at this multiple times. This has to kind of go back behind there and then pull this way. And so I'm gonna try to finagle this thing back in without tearing it off, tearing the air filter off of that cage. And it's just like, oh, there's not enough room in there to get that done without, okay, so I'm able to get it, but I'm using so much pressure there against the filter. And then I have to reach back in the back and see if it's still on all the way, because it's easy to pull that off. I think I've got it, but there's not nearly enough room in there. Let's see if I can get my little bolt in. Maybe. I'm gonna get that. There are times where it's like I can't even get this little wing nut bolt screw to go in. I think I've got it, and I think it's secure, but I'm not 100% sure. And if you're a teenage kid or if you're just in a hurry, the chances of you screwing this up, That's a failure. Now I've got the airbox out of my system. The only other thing on the bike that I would say sucked was the chain. It has a non-O-ring chain and it was a cheap chain. After 1 hour, the thing had stretched to quite a bit. And so I adjusted it, and after about 2.5 hours, it was so bad, and I had adjusted it 3 times. I just swapped the whole thing and went to a quality O-ring chain. I can't remember the last time or if I've ever had to change a chain on one of my big bikes like that. So Kawasaki, you can do better on the airbox and the chain. The rest of the stuff I can give you a pass on. So that's my review of the 2021 KX250X. I really love this bike, and there was a lot more right than there was wrong. There was just a couple little things I had to nitpick on. Some of you might have already seen my video where I said, would you rather this bike or the blue bike, the Yamaha YZ250FX? If you watched that video, I'm still gonna stick by that. I would probably choose the blue one over this one, and it's for several different reasons. It's the engine management, it's a few different things. You can go watch that video. It's down in the feed here. It's like YZ250FX versus the KX250X. A lot of that has to do with the transmission. You can go over there and do that. This bike does have some virtues that I really like, and again, in my top 10 of bikes. One of the best 4-strokes that I've had of all time. So that's my review of this thing. Those are my thoughts, and I'm sticking to it. Again, use my links for Rocky Mountain ATV. You can always send me an email if you have questions, and I will try to get to those. And if you're one of those people that's watching this before June 30th of 2021, you can still enter to win this bike. Go to dirtbikechannel.com. All the details are over there, but don't delay because you've only got a short amount of time, because this is going to go out to a lucky winner. The KTM 125XC is going to go out to a lucky winner, and the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S is going out to a lucky winner. So that's what I've got for everyone today. Until next time, leave a single track. Thanks.